Lucy.
Hi.
Good to see you. And here we are, standing in Magdalen's old library.
Yeah.
So tell me a bit about this building.
So this is part of the original foundation of the college. So it dates from the 1470s. It actually belongs to the fellows rather than the students. It took rather a long time for the college to decide that the students would need books as well. There has been a library in this room since the 1470s.
So it doesn't look particularly 15th century, looking at the ceiling and the bookcases.
No, it was refurbished several times, mostly because the fellows needed more room for their books. Originally, it would have had lecterns with space for books to be sat on those lecterns and desks for the scholars, and all of the books would have been chained and stored underneath. So you would have had room from, say, 800 books.
So they didn't trust the fellows not to walk off with the books?
No, it was standard practice to chain books until quite late in the 17th century. And actually Magdalen was the last library in Oxford to unchain its books. We waited until 1799, which is incredible. This interior is from the 1820s, so early 19th century, and it's very much along the Duke Humphrey model. So cases coming into the room, fitting in as many books as you possibly can.
When the library was first opened, there were 800 books here.
Yeah.
How many books are in the old library now?
So we've got about 20,000.
Just in the old library?
Yeah, and they are mostly printed between maybe 1500 and 1800.
Okay.
Anything later than that is in the new library, and Magdalen has about 100,000 volumes. And we have, on top of the 20,000 volumes here, there's about 150 medieval manuscripts, and the same number again of books called incunables, which were printed before 1501, and they are all stored in our manuscript room, so in a special store.
And the first one we're looking at is not a printed book, is that right?
No, it's right. That's right. It is a manuscript. It's very beautifully written, and that's one of its real joys. It's a book written in the 1510s, 1520s for Thomas Wolsey, who was a fellow of Magdalen at one point in his career. It's a pair of books, the other one of which is now at Christ Church, and they're called lectionaries. So they're very large format books which were intended to be read from in church services on a lectern. One is the epistles for a particular set of services, and then there's the gospel readings, and we have the gospel readings. And as you can see, it's written really beautifully, really clearly in large text so that you can see what you're reading with facility. But it's written after the printing press had been invented, so printed books were circulating at this time. To produce a manuscript like this is to be producing a really luxurious item, which says something about how much you can afford. It was produced in the Netherlands, so it's also been imported, and it's absolutely drenched in symbols relating to Wolsey. So you've got his cardinal's hat and his coat of arms, the blue leopard, who's just wonderful.
You just touched the book there, and I noticed that you're not wearing white gloves. Now, we all know from TV documentaries that whenever you get close-ups of people with books, they start pulling on white cotton gloves. Tell me, why are we not wearing gloves today?
So current practice is that you don't wear gloves, you just make sure you have very clean hands. There's several reasons. One is that the gloves will reduce your dexterity. So you're much more likely to tear a page if you're wearing gloves. And the other thing is that the gloves can themselves get dirty. So you may as well just carry on washing your hands. Yeah. If you see people wearing white gloves, they're doing it because they're on the telly and not for the interests of the book at all.
It is drenched in gold as well as symbols of Wolsey, isn't it?
Everything that's gone into this book is very expensive materials. Gold paint is even more expensive than gold leaf, because leaf is very, very thin. And if you're applying a paint, you use up much more gold for the surface that you're covering. And even the other paints, like the blue, is made from lapis lazuli, which is very, very rare mineral.
And we've got lilies here, which is, of course, the Magdalen flower, which is very satisfying.
It is very nice.
This is St Thomas of Becket being murdered in Canterbury Cathedral.
Absolutely. One of the interesting...
Of course, Thomas Becket, quite a controversial saint for Henry VIII.
Yes.
Because he represents a certain amount of opposition to the centralising executive.
Yeah. These books were made only a few years before Wolsey fell from grace. And as soon as he did, Henry VIII acquired all of Wolsey's things. And then these books get caught up in the Reformation, basically. So the fact that Thomas Becket is here and his image is pristine is interesting, because if we look on the previous page, you can see that his name has actually been scrubbed out. It's one of the most beautiful books that we have in the library. So this is a book which was written between 1125 and maybe 1135. It's a copy of William of Malmesbury's History of the English Bishops, but it's particularly exciting because it appears to be in William of Malmesbury's hand.
Wow.
And
So this is his actual handwriting.
which is very, very rare for this period. Normally manuscripts will be a copy of a copy of a copy, but to have what appears to be a working version of a first version of a particular book is very exciting. But it has a further layer of excitement for Magdalenites in that it's been annotated by John Foxe, the Protestant historian.
Of Foxe's Book of Martyrs.
Of Foxe's Book of Martyrs, exactly. And
Monuments.
he's not done a lot of sort of judgmental annotation, but what he is doing is pulling out the names of particular bishops and saints. It's part of a movement by Protestants to go back to early English church history and demonstrate that that was an authentic apostolic church and that it had been corrupted by the influence of Rome. So that's one of the things that Foxe is working on. We're incredibly lucky to have it, and it was given to us by Foxe's son, who was also a fellow at Magdalen.
So Foxe was at Magdalen.
Foxe was at Magdalen.
And his son was at Magdalen.
And his son and his grandson. So Samuel became a fellow, and when his son in turn became an MA of Magdalen, he gave us this manuscript and 13 others to commemorate that.
What have we got here, Lucy?
We're incredibly lucky to have a copy of this book. This is the first edition of Copernicus's De Revolutionibus, and I've opened it at the most important page for most people. It's quite a complicated book. It has a lot of mathematical, metaphysical arguments in it, but everyone can understand this page, which is one of the first representations of the solar system with the sun in the middle. It's an incredibly important book for modern science, changes the way that man thinks about itself.
So what date? This is the first edition?
So this is 1543, which is actually the year that Copernicus died. So it may be that he never saw the final printed version.
And how did we come to acquire this book?
Yeah, I'll show you the inscription. A lot of the continental science books came from a man called Arthur Throckmorton, whose name is given here, 1626. So he travelled on the continent and bought a lot of books while he was there, and then very kindly left them to Magdalen. We've got actually a pile of some of his other books here, because he had this very distinctive habit of writing a little tab with the name of the book on it. So he was obviously, instead of shelving books as we would with the spine out, he was shelving them horizontally like this.
Throckmorton is a familiar name for 16th century historians.
Yes. So his sister was the Elizabeth Bess Throckmorton, who married Walter Raleigh without the Queen's permission.
And he was an alumnus of Magdalen.
He was. And he, in his will, he left all of his books to Magdalen, apart from his English language books, which he left to his wife, which is quite standard practice to leave your English books to the women of your family. But it is a bit of a blow for us because we know that library included things like early copies of Shakespeare, which would have been wonderful to have.
Thank you very much. So we've looked at some of the early science, and we're going to look at some more early science.
Yep.
And this is where Magdalen goes peak Harry Potter, because if we push the bookcase, it takes us through into the summer common room. So in the summer common room, here's Michelle. Hello, Michelle.
Hi, Dinah. How are you?
I'm really well. And here we're going to look at some early science. Is that right?
Yes, we're going to be looking at some history of science books and also history of medicine books.
And you're a junior research fellow at Magdalen.
Yes. So.
And what's your area of research?
So I'm an early modernist. So I work on the early modern period. And I mainly look at history of science, history of medicine, and also history of religion and how they kind of all were mixed together in this period. And that's pretty much why this is one of my favorite books, I think, actually, in the entire collection.
In the old library, we were just looking at Copernicus, 1543.
1543.
So what have we got here?
This is a book called Astronomicum, Caesareum, and it was published in 1540. So
this
a
is
couple
before.
of years before.
Okay.
Yes. And it was written by a man called Petrus Apianus, who was a mathematician and an astronomer, and he was a geocentrist, right? So pre-Copernicus, he says, the Earth is at the center, right, of everything rather than the sun.
So the sun's going around the Earth.
The sun's going around the Earth, exactly. So this book is really an astronomical book that taught its readers how to find the positions of the planets in the heavens, primarily for the purpose of casting horoscopes. And as you can see from the front page, it's a really lavishly illustrated book.
Beautifully coloured.
Absolutely. I would say it's probably one of the most beautiful and elaborately produced books, really, actually, in the entire history of science. It's one of my favorites. So the first page here, we can see a prominent dedication to the Holy Roman Emperor, Charles V, right? And so what Apianus was really trying to do with this book was actually curry favor with the emperor by saying, look what I can do with astrology, look what I can produce. The book is really mostly famous for its lovely volvels, which we can see here.
Wow.
They're essentially paper instruments made up of layers of movable paper discs. In fact, they're essentially a paper analog computer that allowed the reader to use these moving parts to compute really complicated astronomical calculations without having to do the difficult maths themselves. This particular one is called the sky volvel, so we can see pictured here, basically the stars of the northern and the southern hemisphere all packed together. A fun thing about this one in particular is he was really quite long-sighted in the kinds of predictions he expected people to be able to do. So underneath we can see dates going back to 7,000 years before Christ and 7,000 years after Christ.
Wow.
So theoretically, one could predict where the heavens were going to be, you know, 5,000 years from now, which is pretty amazing.
So this book is still current?
Yeah, right? Even though it's geocentric, you can still get remarkably accurate calculations from this, which I think is pretty amazing. So this one in particular is for locating the position of Saturn. And actually, again, we can see I mentioned Charles V and, you know, Apianus trying to make a good impression. The example he actually uses for calculating the position of Saturn is the emperor's birthday, which he mentions over here.
Okay.
And really finding the location of the planets for the emperor's birthday would allow an astrologer to cast his birth horoscope, the emperor's birth horoscope, right? And from then work out the emperor's characteristics, his virtues, which of course makes the emperor feel good, but also can be used for propaganda to say, okay, you know, this man was really meant to be the Holy Roman Emperor at this time.
Oh, wow. And here we seem to have a large cosmic dragon.
Right, so we have the dragon. So this is one of the dragon volvels, which I'd say are probably my favorite in the book. In medieval and Renaissance astrology, it was actually imagined that there was a dragon kind of spread out across the heavens, and its head and its tail actually were really quite significant, almost as significant as the planets for making astrological predictions. We have a couple of other dragons coming up, and these are quite striking.
More and more elaborate as you go through the book.
Yeah.
It's absolutely breathtaking.
The colours and just the detail that was put into this is phenomenal. And I mean, we can see that some of ours have been bent a little bit, which probably just shows that it was in use, right?
But it's in extraordinary condition.
It's in incredibly good condition, So these two volvels are for, again, calculating the phases of the moon. And this was really essential to making sure you had accurate predictions of when eclipses were going to come. Knowing when eclipses were going to come was super important for astrology because eclipses were thought to be, to herald portentous events. So wars, plagues. So you really wanted to have really accurate, right, calculations of when an eclipse was going to be appearing above certain countries. This is a book called De Humani Corporis Fabrica, so on the fabric of human bodies. And it was written by a man called Andreas Vesalius. It was published in 1543, so the same year as Copernicus.
Yes.
But we actually acquired it in 1545. It was published in Basel. We probably bought it from local booksellers in Oxford who worked with the international book trade. And so this would have been a marvelous book to have in Magdalen's collection for the students studying anatomy and medicine. So this book is coming out of the University of Padua, which was at the time really the center for the study of medicine in Europe. So this was published at a time when physicians were, for the most part, really reliant on written books for the study of medicine, really reliant on authorities like Galen, and they didn't so much use their hands to dissect human bodies. And we can see that Vesalius is doing something a little bit different here. So this is really a work of propaganda, right? So he's saying, you know, look, I'm really novel, look, I'm really innovative, and actually he was so successful in his propaganda that a lot of big myths have kind of built up about this book. So people will often say, oh, Vesalius was the first person who ever cut open a human body, and, the church forbade human dissections. But none of that is actually really true. So that by the time he's writing in the mid-16th century, human dissection was a really common practice. It was a crucial part of the medical curriculum. And in fact, rather than the church forbidding human dissection, a lot of human dissections actually took place in churches.
Gosh, can we see some of the pictures inside?
Let's. So this book is actually 7 books about different parts of the body.
Goodness, look at that.
That's right. So as we go along, each chapter is meant to mimic the process of dissections.
Oh, goodness.
So this one is particularly horrifying. It's a very dramatic stance.
He seems to be on a gibbet.
Because if we can imagine a body lying down flat on the table, can be difficult to see. So this was a way to make it a lot more visible to people at the back of the room. Interestingly, we have another background here, right? Another landscape in the background. And actually, if we take all of the plates out and put them in a row, it's actually a continuous landscape panorama.
Oh, wonderful. So what's our final book going to be?
Okay, so our final book is going to be Micrographia by Robert Hooke. And this was a book that was published in 1665 in England. So now we're actually looking at a book that was also written in English. And what we can see from that is that it was expecting a much broader audience than one that would have just been written in Latin.
And we've moved on now from the Renaissance to the middle of the 17th century, the scientific revolution that was happening in England at that time.
We've jumped forward about 100 years, and this is a time at which experimental science, or as it was called at the time, experimental natural philosophy, is really taking off.
Yeah.
Right? So we have institutions like the Royal Society, of which Hooke was a fellow. We have new scientific instruments like the microscope, and this book is Hooke's collection, really, of the kinds of crazy things that he saw. Now, this one is a particularly important one, although it might not look it. It's actually an image of cork, a close-up of cork. And he was really fascinated by the tiny little compartments that he found in cork. And he said that they reminded him of honeycomb.
Yeah.
The reason this is important is because he actually uses the word cell to describe what he saw. So this is actually the first use of the word cell in the context of, a tiny part of a living organism. He postulated that these cells might be useful for transporting important liquids and juices around the body. So the microscope was never really technically invented. Single lenses had been used for magnification for centuries, really, for spectacles, magnifying glasses, that kind of thing.
Look at this.
That's right.
A terrifying creature.
So he says that the ant was the most difficult thing that he had to deal with because it was so wriggly. So his solution was basically to get his ant drunk. So he says he submerged his ant in brandy for several hours until it became so stupefied that it couldn't move anymore. And he was really quite proud of his creative solution to his problem.
Because the detail is extraordinary.
The detail is amazing. The detail is amazing. So I think this is a really fun book for people at the time because they get to open it and see things up close that they've never seen before, right?
Yeah.
So we have an ant up close, but we also have this ginormous flea.
Oh, wow, that's amazing.
Just a little bit confronting.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially because, as we know now, this was published in 1665, so the year of the Great Plague, when this very creature was responsible for spreading the sickness around.
It's beautiful.
It's quite scary, but it's beautiful, yeah. Samuel Pepys, the famous diarist, he bought this straight away when it came out, and he said he read it until 2 a.m. in the morning.
Oh, wonderful. So thank you very much, Michelle. It was absolutely fascinating. We've seen the outer cosmic heavens, and we've seen right down to the size of a flea.
The microcosm.
Thank you very, very much. So we're back in the old library.
Indeed.
In one of the lovely reading bays.
Indeed,
You can see what
yes.
a nice workspace this is.
Yes.
And you're Marcello?
Yes, Marcello.
And you're doing also, you're a junior research fellow at Magdalen.
That's right.
And tell us, what sort of areas are you working on? What interests you?
Well, my interests more generally are in the early modern period and the literature of the early modern period, but also more generally the philology of the early modern period, and so how people in that period studied texts and placed them in their context and thought about them as texts. And so as a result of this work, I've become particularly interested in the history of biblical scholarship and how people in that period were interested in the Bible and more generally in Jewish culture and Jewish texts.
What's this book?
So this book is a Rabbinic Bible. It's a very important edition of the Bible from the 16th century. So obviously we have to go the other side
because it's Hebrew.
Because it's Hebrew, exactly. So we start from the back to...
So who's the publisher of this Bible?
The title page. The publisher is probably the most important printer of Hebrew books in the 16th century. He's called Daniel Bomberg, although he was from Antwerp originally, but arrived in Venice at the beginning of the 16th century and set up shop.
He's a Jewish printer?
No, actually, he's
Not
Christian.
Jewish.
He's Christian.
In spite of being called Daniel Bomberg, which
yes,
sounds like a Jewish name.
Yes, indeed, but he's a Christian, actually.
Yeah. So what's a Rabbinic Bible?
So a Rabbinic Bible not only contains the Hebrew text of the Hebrew Bible, but also a series of commentaries and other forms of notes that stem from the whole of the Jewish tradition. And we can see how that is laid out on a page later. But here we have a beautiful title page in the shape of a gate that is typical of Daniel Bomberg.
Beautiful. Again, very classical.
Yes.
You can feel the Renaissance here.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
What's the date of this
So
edition?
it's the Hebrew year 308, which corresponds to the Christian year 1548. If we go through to the beginning, we can see how elaborate typographically this kind of book is. So this is the beginning of Genesis, Bereshit, which is the word in the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah. And here,
Frame.
Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz.
Very good.
In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth.
Exactly. And then the other thing is that there is also the Targum, which is a very important paraphrase or translation of the Hebrew text into Aramaic, which was produced first few centuries of the Christian era when Aramaic had superseded Hebrew as the spoken language, and so an Aramaic translation was needed in order to understand the text, and we can see it more clearly here, which has the kind of same apparatus with the Hebrew text on the inner margin.
Yes.
Because traditionally the inner margin is perceived as more important, and there's a hierarchy of importance.
How does Magdalen come to have a Jewish Hebrew Bible? How does that happen?
And in this case, it came to Magdalen as part of a bequest by one of your predecessors, actually, John Harding, who was president of Magdalen College until his death in 1610. Also the Regius Professor of Hebrew here in Oxford. And so he obviously owned many Hebrew books. And actually we have at the beginning here an inscription that records the fact that it's a gift from him. It's a book of the College of Mary Magdalene in Oxford from the gift of John Harding, the professor of sacred theology and a president of this same college here in Latin.
And is it right that he had some involvement in the translation of the King James Bible?
That's right, yes. He was the only scholar from Magdalen to be involved in the translation of the King James Bible that was published in 1611, so just a year after his death.
So he might have used this actual Bible in the process of translating the Bible into English, that extraordinary work. What have we got here?
It is a lexicon or a dictionary called Sefer Meturgeman, which means the book of the translator, a dictionary of the Aramaic terms of the Targum. We talked about the Targum just a moment ago as this Aramaic paraphrase of the Hebrew Bible. By the early modern period, no one spoke Aramaic anymore. It was important to have these kinds of tools to access the Aramaic texts. What's interesting is that obviously the title page is in Latin. So this would be a book that would be marketed towards Christians, although the author, Elijah Levita, is Jewish. He is a very interesting figure in the early 16th century that somehow embodies humanism and the peregrinations and the movements of humanists across Europe. Because as it says here, he was German or coming from a German community. He was born near Nuremberg in Neustadt. And then in the early years of the 16th century, he went to Italy, where he taught for 13 years a Catholic cardinal.
He taught a cardinal?
Yes, a Catholic cardinal in Rome, yes. Egidio da Viterbo, lived in his house. And actually, from a manuscript of this same work, we know the work was meant for Egidio da Viterbo originally, even though it was printed later in Germany when Elijah Levita had gone back to Germany to teach the Reformed scholar Paul Fagius.
So he taught a cardinal and then he taught a Protestant.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it's a
and
very
he's teaching them all Hebrew and Aramaic, so they can read the Bible in its original form. Here
is another book from John Harding that came with his bequest, as is recorded there.
These bequest notices, I presume they must have been written by the Magdalen librarian.
Yes, I would imagine. Yes,
so we've got the handwriting here of the librarian Lucy Gwynn's predecessor.
Exactly.
From 1610.
Yes, and so this is another dictionary. So another tool that John Harding or Christians more generally would have had at their disposal to access Hebrew text. What was for them the Old Testament? It's a Sefer HaShorashim. That is the book of roots that was compiled by a very important medieval rabbi and commentator called David Kimhi, as it says. Yes, here, Rabbeinu David Kimhi, and it was printed by Bomberg, again, in Venice, Venezia, that's the Hebrew writing for Venice. There is just one note, because it is on a very crucial word, the word bara, which we have encountered earlier, which means he created, is the second word in Genesis. They're clearly interested in the word bara, and the word bara is key theologically also, because on it hinges the question of whether creation is creation out of nothing or simply a shaping of materials from previous existing matter. And clearly, theologically, both for Judaism and Christianity, this is creation out of nothing. And this is what Kimhi says in his analysis of the entry of the word. And he quotes other instances of the use of this word in the Hebrew Bible. In this case, Isaiah. There is a verse of Isaiah that is then explained, and it gets translated by the Latin hand that translates the Isaiah verse. The Isaiah and also the explanation by Kimhi. And also, what I think is particularly interesting and kind of gives us further information is that they add a quotation in Hebrew. This is a Hebrew cursive, but in a Christian hand, from another commentary, and that's Nachmanides, Rabbi Nachmani, Super Genesis, so like on Genesis, which says that in our language, in the sacred language, Lashon HaKodesh, there is no expression for creation from nothing into existence, but the word bara. So what this suggests is that this reader obviously had Kimhi, the dictionary, open, as well as the Nachmanides, exactly, to the side, so that they could cross-reference, as well as the Hebrew text. So this really shows and encapsulates the ways in which Christians who were interested in these things really had to familiarize themselves and learn to appreciate Jewish sources.
Absolutely fascinating.
From different periods.
Thank you very much, Marcello.
Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
It was fascinating. Thank you. So Lucy, thank you so much for this tour of your magical domain, the Old Library. And I've felt as though the Renaissance and humanism have been in the room with us while we've been looking at them. You can feel the hands of the scholars who've read the books, annotated them, and used them in their research for such a long period of time.
Absolutely.
The other thing that's really remarkable looking at it is the way that donations have come into the college from different sources, from former presidents, from alumni, and have built up the treasures that Magdalen has under its stewardship now.
Absolutely. And it means that the library itself is a record of the college's history and its intellectual development and the things that its members were interested in and what they were working on. And it's really lovely to have that encapsulated in this material way that we can keep coming back to, researching into and sharing with the world.
And the library is, in fact, open to the public on Wednesdays.
Wednesday afternoons, that's right. Yes. Whenever there's an exhibition on, between 2 and 4:30, and you just need to go to the website to find all the information you need on that. And we also have a series of online exhibitions which are obviously much more accessible for people who can't make it here. There is, again, for the Wolsey Manuscript, we've done an online exhibition which is partnered with Christchurch, so you can look at both of that pair of really beautiful manuscripts together. There's about 6 online exhibitions now that you can explore the collections through, and we'll be building on that.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much for coming. It's been a real pleasure.
And thank everybody for watching. Thank you. Bye-bye.